Scott just made the point.
Jefferson seems to be a lot more secure, not just.
The stars and bars are coming down on the grounds of the South Carolina Capitol in the wake of a shooting rampage by a white supremacist that left 9 dead and a nation grieving. Nobody thinks striking the Confederate battle flag will strike out racism, but prominent voices and some of our neighbors are saying that America still has a racist streak, and what's worse, we're not willing to admit it or deal with it. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle with part 2 of our 3-part trifecta called Land of the Violent, Home of the Racist. In episode 1, we looked at America's penchant for what President Obama calls mass violence and how that's connected with our extraordinary liberty to keep and bear arms. In our members-only part 3, we'll ask if a continent so large can provide enough common ground for a people so diverse. Well, from Ferguson to Staten Island to Baltimore to McKinney, Texas, and now, with the greatest intensity, to Charleston, South Carolina, the chorus rings out that America's racist legacy is far from finished. But many on the right, and many who are white, simply won't admit it. Therefore, they're part of the problem, even if they're not overtly prejudiced against folks with darker skin. Now, Stephen Green, can we just acknowledge that white people may never be able to understand the black experience in America, and that we may have underestimated the impact of racism today?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and I've written as much several times over the years at Vodka on it. There may not be any breaching that gulf, that lack of understanding. We can show sympathy. I think we should try to show empathy if we can, but it's not easy. There is this world of difference right here in neighborhoods that are so close to one another and yet so far apart. The first thing we should do, absolutely, though, is take down that Confederate battle flag. You know what? The South has so many things to be proud of. The greatest food in this country originated in the South. The greatest music in this country originated in the South. You could even argue that the southern states today represent the best and perhaps the last of our founding ideals, and that's a great bit of progress from the time of slavery and the Civil War. It's an amazing thing. But one of the things the South does not have to be proud of is that battle flag. That flag was raised in rebellion against the central government in defense of slavery. And slavery is evil, and slavery is wrong, and that rebellion was wrong, and that flag must come down.
Well, Bill Whittle, blacks and whites tend to talk past each other about racial issues, and people with different perspectives just dig in and hunker down. Isn't it going to take a unilateral move by somebody to break this logjam? And if so, why can't the healing begin on the right?
Race relations in this country are in much worse shape than they were before Barack Obama took office, because the essence of the progressive power structure is to divide the country into tribes, gin up each one of these tribes to be convinced that white people are out to destroy them, put them in plantations, put women in binders, put homosexuals in the back of a truck and drag them through the dirt. That's what the progressive power base is based on, is a constant sense of paranoia and rage. But if you want to get down to the actual basics, yes, there is in fact a serious racism problem in this country, and it's not white people who are the problem. It's black people that are the problem when it comes to race in America. Black racism is infinitely more pervasive than it is in white America, and the kind of things that you can get away with one black person saying to another about white people could never, ever, ever, ever be tolerated in white society. If you want to take a look at the number of people who were lynched in this country in the space of what was it, 70 years of this god-awful horror, it was about 1,000 people. I think the black on white murder rate is that every year. So I think it's about time we had an honest conversation about race in this country. You want to have an honest conversation about it. I see people after this South Carolina massacre saying that white people are terrorists, and this narrative that's being promoted by President Obama and the Justice Department, that black people can't walk through the streets of this country without being murdered, is an absolute inversion of the actual truth. And we're not going to have any progress on race until people have the courage to come forward and talk about this crime spree and this murder spree, and all of this stuff has got to be put on the table and discussed openly, because it's not just tolerated, Scott, it's promoted. And I don't have time to go into the details of this, but if you really want to look at the greatest catastrophe in American history, it's when Black America decided to follow the path of W.E.B. Du Bois and have the talented 10th administer largesse given to them by the great white father in Washington, as opposed to taking the advice of the greatest American I think who maybe's ever lived, certainly the most unsung American, in the person of Booker T. Washington, who basically said, look, we may have to go back to work on farms and plantations because that's all we know how to do. We may have to be farmers so that our children can be mechanics, so that their children can be doctors. Booker T. Washington in the Tuskegee Institute produced students whose grade point average was higher than the white average and their legitimacy rate was higher than the white average. They produced better citizens than white America did. They were better in every way. The Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber, despite the fact that they had subpar training and subpar leadership. They were told they had to be better, and they were. And the great catastrophe in American history is to go down this road of resentment and entitlement and an absolute excusing of these kind of behaviors, when in a world that if they'd taken the path of Booker T. Washington, we would seek out black people on the streets today and ask them for advice on how to hold a marriage together, or ask them what the meaning of a certain Latin term was, or anything else that this product of the Tuskegee Institute could have given us. It's a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe. And no one will ever make any progress in this country until they have the courage to come out and start putting these things on the table.
Just finished not too long ago reading Up From Slavery, and I highly recommend it. When I was done reading that, I thought I may have just read the autobiography of the greatest American.
There you go.
It was really thrilling to read. Listen, people gather. We gather with the like-minded. We gather with fans of our favorite team. We gather with those who play, work, and worship like us. And yes, we gather with people who look like us. People of all pigments do it, and they always have. And perhaps that's just human nature, or a product of common cultures, norms, or habits of speech. But when we see differences no deeper than the shade of the surface, and we retreat to our own corner of the palette, I think we impoverish ourselves. I've had arguments with Republican politicians who discourage me from wasting time going door to door in urban neighborhoods. We can't win there, they said. But my experience among black and Latino voters was wonderful and shocking for me and for them. They often told me that they had never seen a Republican candidate on their doorstep. And I was overcome by gratitude as people pledged to vote for me and even contributed to my campaign, seemingly from their mere gratitude that I had showed up and listened and asked for their vote. Now, for those who experience racism in America, telling them that they don't is not only insulting, it's not useful to you. If you can't empathize, maybe you should just listen. You don't need any answers. You don't even need to talk. If we ever hope to put the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow completely behind us, it's not going to happen on TV or Facebook or Twitter or even in the White House. It's going to happen one person at a time among people who show up, and sometimes who shut up. I'm talking to you, Scott Ott. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I am Scott Ott.